Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Workers coming to the United Kingdom from European countries should not be given preferential treatment over those from the rest of the world, according to a major report commissioned by the government. The report from the Migration Advisory Committee also says caps on the number of highly skilled workers coming here should be scrapped. But says the committee, the number of low-skilled workers should be limited. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, is in Loch Ness. Alex.
Yes, well, not in it, John, but near it, fighting the midges on this late summer's evening. And what you get here is a sense, perhaps, of what goes on in so much of Britain, not just the Highlands, areas of the economy wholly dependent on unskilled workers. Come to that in a minute, but let's have a look at what the report is saying, its main recommendations. Let's run through these briefly for you. First up, as you mentioned, the same rules, they say, should apply for both global and EU migrants. That could be a big sticking point depending on what deal, if any, emerges with our European partners. It suggests also skilled workers could be the post-Brexit migration winners, easing UK access for them if they're earning over £30,000. But most controversially, perhaps, it argues that there should be no migration scheme for low-skilled workers, and it candidly adds in the report summary this is likely to be strongly opposed by the affected sectors. Well, not off on that last one. We've been talking to those in the front end of this, in tourism and in manufacturing here in the Highlands, to see how their experience mirrors other areas of the country. They're not pleased by what this report could presage if it's taken up.
It is not uncommon to experience snow at any time of the year.
Up into the Cairngorms, the easy way. The highest, windiest, coldest landscape Britain can offer. A precious but fragile place. Aviemore, distantly visible west along the Glen. A town, a region almost wholly dependent on tourism and the foreign army of migrant workers doing largely unskilled jobs, which supports it. Signs on the high street here that all is not well. That foreign army, for various reasons, isn't coming here the way it once did.
It is the uniqueness of the Cairngorm Mountains that draws visitors from all over the world to this place and supports the local tourism industry. But that pattern is not unique in that tourism industry is heavily dependent on people coming from beyond British shores to work here. And in that sense, the industry pattern here is the same as that right across the UK. They need those people, and for it to expand, they're going to need more of them in the future.
Northeast from Aviemore, and you're into the whisky country of Speyside, to Carbridge. And here you'll find a hotelier saying what Britain's hoteliers say, from the Scillies to Shetland.
If we don't have these migrational workforce coming in to help us, quite frankly, we don't have the manpower available to us in the UK population. It's as simple as that. So if we don't have adequate manpower, then we don't have a service provision.
The Highlands, just the same expression of every tourist area in the country, where rural depopulation, high house prices and historically low unemployment mean industries like tourism can simply only function with foreign labour. Victoria came to Carbridge from Bulgaria, Andriy from Ukraine via Portugal's Algarve. But who needs the Algarve when you've got the Scottish climate?
I think here is a paradise, because here we have the beautiful scenery, breathtaking views, and the beautiful weather. It's better than the laying on the beach and have the sun all the year.
It's better than the Algarve?
Sure it's better.
Bulgaria is really difficult right now. The salary is not good, and it's just the economic is not good there at all. So I prefer staying here, just working and taking like normal salary and everything. I can have a normal life here.
A host of public bodies today charging in to accuse the Migration Advisory Committee of advocating changes which could be disastrous.
The share of low-skilled migrants in the UK has increased a lot over the last 10 to 15 years. But it's important to understand that what we propose doesn't force the current situation to change, but what it does mean that if these sectors want to grow in the future, they perhaps have to think about other ways, about using their workers more effectively, so raising productivity, perhaps finding a way to pay higher wages so they can compete more successfully for other workers in the UK labour market.
The committee acknowledges that in some areas of Britain, away from rural regions like the Highlands, the impact of high immigration across social services and wage sectors is claimed to be damaging, but today's report firmly rejects those criticisms. So we head along Speyside, continuing northeast to Aberlour. Here, one of several of the Walker's shortbread factories. 1,700 workers, almost a third foreign migrants. But more and more Polish workers here are going back home now as the economy there strengthens.
Plenty people back for the home now. It's my friends for the England, back for the Poland as well. People try, if you something, you know, if you find it for the Poland, good job and back.
The familiar lament here, we're already short-staffed, we rely on foreign unskilled workers, but now management have to contend with a new Warsaw charm offensive.
We believe that the Polish government in particular is trying to make contact with some of their nationals overseas to encourage them to come back home, now that they're better trained, and they claim that there are plenty of jobs there in Poland. So some of them will be tempted back. But I think the other big issue is the fact there's not the fresh troops coming in behind them.
So we descend from the mountain to impending disaster or opportunity. If we're honest, nobody yet knows, but here as across UK tourism and manufacturing, it is the uncertainty that is so corrosive.
Alex Thompson, near Loch Ness. Now, the government did not provide anyone to discuss this issue with us, so let's go live to our political editor, Gary Gibbon, in Westminster. Gary, how much does this help Theresa May?
Oh, I think she will be feeling that it gives expert credibility, intellectual underpinning to more or less where her thinking has landed. The idea that if you're coming from the EU, you'll have to have a salary above 30k before you can come here to work. The idea that effectively numbers will come down because although there could be more medium and higher skilled, the real bulk of EU migration responsible for some of the big numbers has been less skilled. Theresa May has been really probably the most hard line on immigration in her entire cabinet. She always says, I'm told, in meetings that she feels control on immigration was the primary message of the referendum, and she now has in Sajid Javid, her Home Secretary, someone who agrees with her pretty much on an awful lot of this agenda, certainly on the idea that we shouldn't have an immigration policy post-Brexit that has preferential treatment for the EU. So they'll be pleased with that, but they'll be hearing the business cries. You heard them in Alex's piece, others from people in social care, construction, lots of areas been hearing about those. The other problem, of course, that it creates is that there is a gap, a giant sort of Cairngorm-sized crevasse, really, between the British government's position and the EU position when it comes to Brexit negotiations. We are not necessarily any closer to closing that gap when we add tightening restrictions on immigration to the list of things where we disagree.
Gary, thanks very much indeed.
The limit on the number of highly skilled workers who want to move to Britain should be abandoned, according to an official report commissioned by the government. The Migration Advisory Committee, whose report is about immigration policy after Brexit, is recommending a system based on skills rather than giving preferential treatment to people from the European Union. But the committee also found that overall, the impact of migration from Europe on the UK has been relatively small. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, has been studying the findings.
East London, making clothes, and a factory that is 85% staffed by EU migrants.
What are you bringing over to here?
For Chief Executive Jennifer Holloway, any change to that could cause some real headaches.
They're the ones that are already skilled. They are absolute masters at their profession. If EU workers weren't available to us, then I think the adult education budget, which has had lots of reductions over the past few years, could be increased, so we could take more people off the unemployment register and give them the technical skills required.
Today's migration report says EU migrants have boosted the UK economy, paying more in taxes than they receive in public services. Any negative effect on wages has been small. But house prices have been pushed up slightly. A higher population means more demand. Leeds and the view from the market. Concern about immigration has fallen since the Brexit referendum.
There are a lot of people coming out of education and they're a bit worried about their job prospects because there might be more competition.
If there's say a doctor in Nigeria and he can't get in, if he's good enough and he can bring something to the NHS in Britain, let him in for me. I'm all for that. As long as they don't bring in butchers, I'm happy with that. They're not taking my job.
So, what are the big ideas on immigration in this report? First, end free movement for EU workers. Second, no preferential access for EU citizens over workers from other parts of the world once the UK leaves the EU. Though the report does say that position could change if immigration becomes part of the EU negotiations. Third, high-skilled immigration should be encouraged and low-skilled workers discouraged, apart from in the agriculture sector, such as fruit picking. Now, to all those that say that the free movement of EU workers into the UK has been good for the British economy, you're saying that's not true, that actually free movement should stop.
The problem with free movement is that you don't have control over the number of migrants and you don't have control on the mix of migrants. So we think that if migration is managed, there's a way in which we can accentuate the benefits and mitigate the costs.
Taking control of our borders. That was the message from the Prime Minister following the referendum. And with this report backing that position, the critics are already lining up.
I think this report is a missed opportunity. Any decision by the government to reduce immigration at the expense of economic growth will be damaging to London and damaging to our country.
The economics of immigration versus the politics and support for more restrictions.
When I spoke to Unite members after the Brexit vote, it was very clear that migration was one of, if not the key issue, of why they voted to leave the EU. So from their perspective, the announcement that there is going to be a much more measured approach to migration will be warmly welcomed.
How high will the levels of control be on immigration once the UK leaves the EU? We will know the answer to that when the government announces its new, long-awaited immigration policy in the next few weeks. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Let's go live to Westminster, and John Pienaar is there, our Deputy Political Editor. Let's talk about how this kind of set of recommendations, John, is likely to translate into actual policy.
Well, Hugh, today's recommendations are knocking at a politically open door in calling for EU citizens to be treated the same as non-EU citizens. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary have been hinting as much, and ministers across the board are keen to be seen to be bearing down on the level of migration. But it's never as simple as that. Business leaders are worried about being deprived of the low-skilled labour they need. They're hoping that the talks on a future trade relationship might lead to some agreed access for EU workers. But of course, and here's the problem, for those detailed talks to even get going, some way needs to be found of avoiding a hard Brexit. And that means a way to avoid the emergence of a border, a hard border in Ireland. The whole process, Hugh, looks tonight to be very delicately balanced. Meanwhile, the lines are opening up between the big parties and within government. There are ministers who doubt the wisdom of Theresa May's promise of keeping net migration below 100,000. That promise has been broken again and again. Labour is more interested in workers' rights and protection than in keeping down numbers. Now, it's a fight Theresa May seems happy to have. In the coming party conference speech, a couple of weeks' time, there's a good bet that she'll be using that occasion to burnish her credentials as being tough on migration.
John, once again, thanks very much. John Pienaar there for us at Westminster. Let's stay with the Brexit process, because the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has said that he's ready to come forward with an improved proposal on the question of the Irish border after Brexit. He said that the EU offer would fully respect the territorial integrity of the UK. The issue of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic has emerged, of course, as one of the main obstacles to an agreement ahead of the UK's withdrawal in March of 2019. Let's talk to Katja Adler, our Europe editor, who's joining us now from Brussels. Katja, what can you tell us about what lies behind this suggestion?
Well, Hugh, I think in the febrile atmosphere that we find ourselves in this end stage of the Brexit negotiations this autumn, there can be a tendency in the UK to really jump on any EU comments, to sometimes overplay them or misinterpret them, but not tonight. As you say, we've long said that in trying to find a Brexit deal between the EU and the UK, the Irish border issue could be the issue this autumn that could bring a deal tumbling down. And tonight, ahead of an EU leaders summit that Theresa May will be attending and where Brexit will be discussed, even though not negotiated, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator says, look, we're going to make a new improved offer on Ireland. Now, actually, it's not really new, Hugh. The EU knows that the UK doesn't accept its current proposal. Theresa May has said that it will constitutionally break up the United Kingdom, somehow separating Northern Ireland off from the rest of the UK. So since the summer, the European Commission has been trying to de-dramatise their proposal, as they call it, to take out the politics and to try and show this proposal is purely practical. The fact that Michel Barnier went big on this tonight ahead of that EU leaders summit is part of a concerted effort now by EU leaders to try and help Theresa May. They want a Brexit deal this autumn, so with words and with gestures they'll try to help her, but this is still not, Hugh, about compromising their principles or red lines.
Katya, once again, thanks for the latest analysis there at Brussels. That's Katya Adler, our Europe editor.
How much does migration hurt this country? How much does it help? The question's not a new one, but the findings today from the Migration Advisory Committee seek to separate sentiment from statistics. Their analysis suggests that the average migrant from the European Economic Zone makes a sizable net financial contribution over their lifetime, and states that immigration's been a supplier of a lot more NHS employees than patients. They recommend scrapping the cap on the number of high-skilled migrants, but advocate EU workers be subject to the same visa rules as other migrants unless offered a special status under a Brexit deal. Well, Chris Cook has been crunching through the numbers now and is here. Anything surprise you in this, Chris?
Well, if you're someone who's followed the economic arguments about migration for a long time, the Migration Advisory Committee's work on EEA, that's European Economic Area migrants, mostly the EU, probably isn't going to be that shocking. So, for example, their analysis was that in the long run, when you take everything into account, and each additional EEA migrant makes an average net fiscal contribution to our exchequer of about £78,000 over his or her lifetime. That's including pensions, including hospitals, everything else. That's a lot more, by the way, than for non-EEA migrants who make a £28,000 contribution per head. We expect the balance of cost and tax to be a little lower. There is some evidence that they find that poorer people's wages are compressed a little. They're a little lower because of migration, but it's an incredibly small amount, they find. So here is the chair of the Migration Advisory Committee setting out earlier today what the context is.
When the pound fell after the EU referendum result, that led to a rise in import prices. That the effect of that on people's purchasing power was almost certainly bigger than all the labour market impacts of migration since 2004.
Now, this report actually starts from a very peculiar position because it sort of asks us to imagine that we've left the European Union and there's no Brexit negotiation going on. There's no sort of political context to their recommendations. So it's all very otherworldly, and they sort of fully acknowledge that the government should sort of probably ignore them to some extent. But their plan, in their universe, what they said they'd go for is a less restrictive regime for higher skilled workers than for lower skilled workers, in a system where there's no preference for EEA over non-EEA workers. So they propose that EEA, so EU really, mostly, workers coming here, we need to get a so-called Tier 2 work visa. That would mean they'd need to earn £30,000 a year to get entry, and that would really clobber low-skilled worker entry into the UK. They do propose, at the moment there's actually a cap on the number of Tier 2 visas. They propose you get rid of the cap, so you have more people coming in and else. They acknowledge, though, that this might all cause problems for people who do need low-skilled workers. So for example, well, yeah. So they say, for example, we do not recommend an explicit work migration route for low-skilled workers, with the possible exception of seasonal agricultural worker schemes. They did take special note in the report of social care, which is quite interesting. A huge non-UK born workforce, rising numbers of EU workers, lots of vacancies. They say that social care is a sector that could face even more serious problems if EEA migration were restricted. The answer they point to, though, isn't a sort of fruit pickers scheme. It's pay social care workers more so that British people actually want to do those
jobs. Right. Chris, thanks very much indeed.
Back now to our main report tonight, the government-commissioned report on immigration after Brexit and the impact on workers from inside and outside the EU. Joining us now are Alexandra Bulat, a Romanian PhD student in London who's written about the prospects for EU citizens living in the UK after Brexit, and Enam Ali, Bangladeshi-born British businessman, founder of the British Courier Awards, who campaigns for more immigration opportunities for Commonwealth countries. And I'm wondering, Enam Ali, whether you see today as good news then for your campaign.
Indeed, very good news. We are very pleased that at last government has recognized our problem. Immigrants is a perception in this country has always been negative. And I think this is showing the way forward. Our businesses suffered for many years. We have seen last few months a number of restaurants being closed. And our restaurant is a different business model where we are very much connecting to the community. It's a very community-led restaurant, our livelihood within the community. So we are very pleased that present government has recognized.
But you have no guarantee that immigration will be as high as it is now.
Well, I am very hopeful that, of course, there's some challenges of few things we need to adapt and change. One of the challenges of at the present policy has disallowed if any high-skilled migration wants to come from India or Bangladesh or Dubai. If I do a takeaway, I can't able to bring him in. So it is totally unfair. And I think it is very important for government has to revisit and make the policy, make sure it's friendly for the businesses.
Well, now, Alexandra, you're nodding your head. You want the same regulations fundamentally as exist now.
Well, I think even looking at migration policy at the moment, I can see a lot of unfairness in the non-EU migration policy, in particular the cap on some skilled non-EU workers. And I'm glad to see the recommendations from the Migration Advisory Committee today. And I think that will help a lot of businesses, curry houses included. But in terms of EU citizens, I'm just concerned about what will happen to those already here. So now, of course, the migration policy after Brexit will be up to the government to decide, and they're still negotiating on that. But the question is...
are you concerned that people who already got here and have permission to be here may have that permission rescinded in some way?
Yes, the government said they will implement the new settled status system, but one needs to apply and pay for the settled status. And for example, I was refused permanent residence in the UK, although I'm a PhD student and I could be categorized as a high-skilled migrant. So it's not really a guarantee unless we see this new system into law that people will be
You
fine.
see yourself as a possible victim of the current kind of reorganization?
Yes, no one is really sure. I mean, the settled status is still being trialed at the moment, but we're not really sure. The Home Office has an error rate, so EU citizens were promised full and automatic guarantee of all their rights here by campaigners across the board during the referendum campaign, and we're not really sure if everyone will have those rights.
Well, do you want fewer Alexandras coming in here and more of your high-skilled curry chefs?
Yes, well, if I have...
Well, poor girls. I mean, what's going to happen to her?
Of course, we have a number of people from EU working at the moment front of house. If you look at a lot of Indian restaurants right across the country, from Romanian and various people working at the present. But we are talking about chef here. We are talking about skilled chef, highly skilled people. We need them desperately.
But are you not conscious that actually the moment, the awful truth is that many people in Britain simply want less of both of you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with that. I agree with that. I'm really.
Well, you want less of both of you?
Absolutely, but I'm not asking for the people come here and for taking it for after 3 years for permanent route or residency route. They can come here as a temporary base for 3 years and 5 years. If you look at my proposal to the government, I think the perfect solution. The taxpayer feel very comfortable on my proposal. A, they're not able to take any NHS because they have the private insurance. They come here for 5 years, support my business, and they will leave after that a period gone. So business will be sustained. And that's what I'm after. Actually, the taxpayer people feel burdened for how long they can able to provide somebody not contributed in this country to pay their NHS and welfare state.
Well, Enam Ali seems quite relaxed about more of you being kicked out.
I'm not sure he actually said that about people already here, but I think it's important to have a migration system that works for everyone and that works for the NHS, for industries, for hospitality as well. So there's one thing to see public opinion on migration, and another thing to actually collect evidence and see what makes sense economically in the UK and to support those sectors that have skill shortages at the moment.
I mean, you're doing your PhD on migration
Yes.
Then do you feel you'll probably have to go, or do you want to be able to stay and do more work?
Well, my plan is to stay within UK academia after we leave the European Union. But as I said, we can't really be sure until the settled status is implemented. So at the moment, I was just rejected permanent residence, and my future is still uncertain. So,
well,
yeah.
thank you. I'm really grateful to you for coming in, Alexander Bulat, and Emelo too. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you.